Welcome, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all again to have another essential conversation at Wellbeings. Today, I'm really honored, privileged, and moved to have. Well, it's hard to know what to call this young man, well, Richard Erskine is somebody I've looked up to for years. He has a PhD as a training director at the Institute of Integrative Psychology or Psychotherapy. He's a clinical psychologist, five decades of experience in the clinical practice and teaching of psychotherapy. He has specialized in the treatment of severe disturbed children and run a therapeutic community in a maximum security prison. Wow. And conducted psychotherapy practice in New York City, specializing in the treatment of obsession, dissociation, narcissism, schizoid processes. Now, for all of you who are listening in here, who also Richard is wrote 10 books, maybe more than 10 books. I've got 5 of them here: Beyond Empathy, Life Scripts, sort of Integrative Psychotherapy in Action, and Transactional Analysis in Contemporary Psychotherapy. And I just can't get enough of this stuff because it helps me find language, and it helps me build bridges towards people and understand how I think and understand what happens between people. And so I really wanted to have this opportunity to talk about something that struck me from some of Richard's work, and it was this concept of 8 relational needs. And I really feel that I would love for us to explore this today and to talk about it and to name maybe the 8 relational needs and to talk about why they're important. And I suppose my first question for you, Richard, again, thank you for being with me. Thank you for being with us here at Wellbeings. Tell me about how you got this wisdom. How did it get distilled?
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with Wellbeings and with you, Nigel. How did I get here? By borrowing ideas from lots of brilliant people. That's the one. By making a lot of mistakes along the way and having to find some way to correct them and make sure I don't make that mistake again. And I'm still learning. I still attend programs. I just was a student in a 3-day conference. I'm part of a study group that meets a couple Friday nights a month. So I still stay very active. I read a lot. So that's how I got here. I didn't start out to be a psychotherapist. In order to stay out of Vietnam, I became a special education teacher, knowing that they weren't going to draft special education teachers. I fell in love with the kids. So I kept going back and taking more psychology courses. And then I also went and sought people who were real masters in the field to see if they could mentor me and teach me what they know. So it's been an exciting journey. Yeah. So about relational needs. This began as a concern of mine in trying to do couples therapy, where often people would talk about, well, he doesn't love me anymore, or she doesn't love me anymore. And not being sure what they even meant by that. And it was very hard to tease that out of people. At the same time, I was sort of struggling with that. I had a seminar where the people were all really advanced senior psychotherapists. Many of them received patients who had been somebody else's client. Mm-hmm. And we got interested in why did people change therapists? Probably not much different than why people change partners, right? And we began to explore with them what was missing in the psychotherapy and what was not happening. At the same time, we're looking at what's not happening in the couples. Mm-hmm. So we started doing a lot of investigation. There were 16 of us that spent a year interviewing people, and we had a whole bunch of terminology. But after doing a factor analysis, which is a kind of a quasi research technique that we use, we came up with 8 primary relational needs. These are needs that we all have throughout our life, from birth to death. They take different forms, but that these are the needs that can only be fulfilled by relationship. Yes, people can try to satisfy themselves, and that works for a little while, but it's not very satisfying. I don't know if I should say this on a broadcast, but trying to satisfy yourself is almost like masturbation. It feels good, but it's not fulfilling in terms of the relationship.
Yeah.
So, you want me to talk about the 8 of them?
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be
Okay.
amazing.
Great. The first is security in relationship. This is having our physical and emotional vulnerabilities protected. It's being in the presence of someone you know they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to hit you. But probably for many of us, more than that, it's being in the presence of somebody who's not going to humiliate you, who's not going to put you down and think that you're stupid or irrelevant in some way. And it's being with somebody whose very being and interest in you gives a sense of security. Now, certainly a baby needs that.
Mm-hmm.
A toddler, a kindergarten age kid needs it from the kindergarten teacher.
Mm-hmm.
A high school kid needs it. I went to a high school where none of the teachers were equipped to provide the security that we kids needed in that school from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need that security in our marriage, in our partnership. We need that kind of security as we get old. That sense of being able to trust your doctor. Right? So it's something that goes on throughout life, takes different forms at different times. Right? And when that security is threatened, relationships get disrupted and people become defensive. The second need is validation and affirmation within the relationship. This is where our emotions, our fantasies, how we construct meaning are accepted and respected by the other person. But more than just accepted and respected, they provide, the other person provides a real sense of validation rather than saying, oh, that's just your fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
What we need is someone to say, oh, tell me about that fantasy. What does that fantasy mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh, that's just your fear of something. Well, tell me about that fear. In other words, we all need a sense of feeling validated and affirmed within the relationship. And we gravitate to people who provide us with that kind of validation.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't get validation consistently, we withdraw. We move away from them. Or we may fight with them in order to get some validation.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Then as I'm hearing you say that, I've got this sort of thing like I am here, and you are here, and I hear you, and that what you have to say matters, and I'm gonna be interested, and I'm gonna be interested in what you have to say, and I think that's a very powerful thing that I see in my clinical practice. It's just people starved of interest, where that happens in their childhood. There's a sort of starvation for that very thing that this relation need gives.
And you're responding to this need in me for validation by inviting me to be on this program and talk about my research. Yeah. And I hope that in some ways my being here provides validation for you of saying this is an important broadcast to reach a lot of people and that you have put a lot of time and energy in making this happen. Yeah. So that that validation becomes
Well
very
said.
mutual. Yeah.
Mhm. Before we go to number 3, Richard, could you just share, that's a mutuality. There's an exchange happening. There's something happening where two people are meeting. Is there a way then where some people can need when does the validation, is it possible for the validating where you go seeking that and it can be something that there isn't an internal structure built yet, or where someone overextends or compensates to get that very thing relationally in a way that can become kind of self-destructive or draining, we know, like compensating, or where I'm going to be more, or I'll be loved for what I do so that they can see me because I haven't seen myself yet. I'm trying to be general about it. Does that make sense?
Your generalization is a good one. Love me, validate me, pay attention to me, and I'll do anything to get that. Which is why kids will often do things that they know are going to get them in trouble. But that's that search for connection. The transactional analysts have a wonderful saying that negative strokes are better than no strokes at all. Right? And I think that you often have people doing things in deep search of that kind of validation. It's notice me, attend to me, and take what I do as significant. Yeah. Okay, should we talk about number 3? Which is acceptance by a stable and dependable other person. Right. To be with somebody who we can get reliable information. In psychotherapy, is to be with somebody who protects us from our own escalation of our emotions. For example, somebody who will stop us from turning a small incident into a major crisis. Or somebody who will help us not exaggerate a situation. Right? Somebody who will deal with the internal criticism and help us relax any internal criticism. It's having somebody you can look up to, admire, and take some strength and guidance from. Now, what's needed? It's to have people in our life who are consistent and dependable and reliable, who can provide a sense of protection to us through their consistency, dependability, and reliability. Now, that's what many psychotherapists strive to provide. Right? Now, a lot of people said, I don't want to become dependent on my therapist. What do they do instead? They're dependent on alcohol. They're dependent on the Coke. They're dependent on cigarettes. They're dependent on overeating. So they find other forms of something to give them some comfort and solace instead of finding it in relationship. And that's part of the process of psychotherapy, shifting people away from those toxic forms of dependency into a temporary reliance on the therapist to learn how to then become self-reliant. And that's much excuse me. That's much of what we do in the field of psychotherapy.
I love that. Wow. And it's like beforehand there. So there's a dependency in a way that's self-destructive, and there's a sort of and there's two things I hear when you talk about this. One is that they start to experience that they can get resourced outside of themselves by another, and be able to have that exchange happening in this need, and then they learn in a way to do it for themselves through the process of
in doing that, they learn their own a new form
mhm.
of more effective resource. Yeah.
We need people, anybody who's watching in here at the moment, like we need people to do this thing called life. We can't do it by ourselves.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I think we are born relationship seeking
Mhm.
right from the beginning of life. My third daughter was born by cesarean, and I was friends with the obstetrician, so he let me be part of the surgery. My job was to hold my wife's head. Yeah, and they did an incision. They pulled the child halfway out. I couldn't tell yet if it was a boy or a girl. I came around the table and they put an aspirator in her mouth. And then she opened her eyes and she looked at me and she smiled. And I thought, wow, the first moment she's engaging in a relationship. She's engaging in a transaction between us, eye to eye, and a smile. Then they took her out. We could see it was a girl. They cleaned her off a little bit, put her in my arms. She continued to smile until the nurse took her and put her on the cold table. And then she let out a scream. And I realized not only are they relationship seeking from the beginning, they also have the capacity to protest. And
Exactly.
I'll be coming to that in a little bit, the importance of making an impact.
Mhm. Wow.
But I think we all need somebody to look up to, rely on. I want to make sure that I can really be dependent on my doctor in my old age. Right? If you're going to a psychotherapist, you want somebody you can really depend on. That's one of the reasons why we have ethics. The client-centered reason for having ethics is to respond to the need in the client to have somebody who is consistent and dependable and reliable. Right? Most ethics codes are written to protect the profession, but the real reason is because our clients need us to be clean. Should we go on, or did you have any
Yeah.
more questions on that one? Okay.
Yeah, no, just for anybody listening out there who are thinking about the journey to stepping into, starting, who've never been in therapy or been in therapy before, like, to know that this is what's possible. You have a good enough therapist, in the words of Winnicott, you have a good enough therapist who's working on themselves to a degree to want to be a safe place for you to go to, and there's ethics that protect that, and with you know, and sometimes I remember when I started therapy, I didn't have anywhere else in my life where I could find that safety, where I could find that place where I could look up to somebody, where
Yeah.
I had somebody who was a mentor who was life affirming. It really helped me grow. He was consistent and he was really interested and present, and yeah, he helped me in ways that I wouldn't be talking to this wonderful man and to be doing this today if it wasn't for somebody stable like that in my life at a time when I needed it. So just anybody thinking of therapy, psychotherapy specifically, it's definitely something I would recommend.
And I think that all psychotherapists need their own psychotherapy.
Oh yeah.
Some of the best way I've learned about therapy is to be a client with some good therapists in my life. But it's also important to be part of regular ongoing supervision, regular training, peer group seminars. That becomes, I think, part of our ethical commitment to the profession, to constantly be cleaning. In the same way, if you go to your doctor and he uses some instrument to look in your ear or down your throat, he's going to sterilize them before the next patient comes in.
Mhm.
All right. In a way, we've got to keep ourselves sterile.
Yeah.
We've got to
I
keep
love it.
ourselves clean in order
Yeah.
to be there for somebody else. And that's a
Absolutely.
lifetime commitment.
Yeah. You don't ever get it sorted. It's continual. Yeah. Wow. It's always something I believed, and that's why I grew, Richard. And I have a long way to go, but it's true. The supervision and the consistent weekly therapy and supervision that helps us stay sterile and clean and not bringing stuff that's not needed into the
Yeah.
room with people. So.
I ran a therapy program, a therapeutic community in a maximum security prison for 4 years. And I was constantly getting challenged by those guys about how I lived my life. They wanted to know every little detail. I think they were looking to see, was I staying out of trouble? Was
Mm,
I providing a model for how they could live their life once they got out? Now, I'm sure that a lot of them went right back into the same old cycle. Um, it was only when it was clear that they didn't want to look up old friends that I knew they weren't going to get back into the system.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Now, let me share another one. Number 4. That's confirmation of personal experience. This is where mutuality is so important. This is different than the previous one, where we're looking up to somebody for strength and guidance and support. The way Winnicott said, we need somebody who is older, wiser, and stronger than us. When we come to the number 4, we're talking about somebody who's equal to us, somebody who knows our experience because they've been there. This is why in a lot of a lot of the recovery programs, we are using counselors who themselves have been addicts because they know the experience, they've been there. Um, this is why minorities like to be with minorities groups, because there's so much they don't have to say. Right? I was doing a workshop uh, last year, and I look across the room, and there's a woman who picks up her paper and she starts fanning herself like this. And I looked around, and all the 50-year-old women in the room looked at her and smiled and just nodded. It was that sisterhood of women knowing about their hot flashes. Right? They didn't have to talk. They knew they were bonded right away. All right. The same thing that I have a guy that I trained for a while who came out of a lot of heroin addiction and he can spot people who are users right away, and they have that connection, and he invites them into his therapy program with amazing success because I think he understands them from the inside out. And that's what we all need to. We need that kind of companionship. Now, we talked about how we got into some of this. When you start talking in couples therapy about what's wrong with the marriage, he says, well, she doesn't love me anymore. And as I pin it down, what do you mean she doesn't love you? Well, she doesn't go skiing with me anymore. She doesn't go boating with me anymore. And I may turn to her then and say, well, uh, you say you don't love him. What do you mean? She said, well, I can't trust him. I can't live up to him. He's not there in a protective way. Right? So what they're talking about is not, I don't feel loved. It's that I'm not getting my needs met. And so we've got both the need to look up to somebody and the need for mutuality. And they vary. They won't be happening at the same moment.
It's very clear. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, a lot of therapists get confused by this because some therapists say, well, we need to be such a sterile instrument. We don't reveal ourselves. This is all about the client and we're a blank screen. Well, that's fine if the client needs to look up to you as somebody very special and powerful. But if that client is needing more mutuality, then they want to know, did you struggle with your marriage? Or did you ever have the kind of depression that I have? Or how did you overcome your anxiety? Then they want to know. So it's whether we tell them our story or not really depends on what does the client need. Do they need to see us as somebody who's got it all 100% together? Or do they need to see that we too have struggled as they have?
Yeah. And the wisdom to know when to do what.
Yeah.
To know which one.
And sharing our experience becomes important. My mother once wrote a poem that is the introduction to my to a new book that that's coming out later this year on the schizoid process, and it goes like this: I met a man along the way, and we had many words to say, because he too had known a sorrow I had borne alone. And that little poem catches the importance of having a shared relationship. And that's what we do in counseling and therapy. We provide some of that. The next one, number 5, self-definition. We all need to define ourselves. When I teach this with my PowerPoint, I've got a picture of a guy with holding what looks like a guitar, but it's no guitar. And he's jumping up in the air and he's singing. And I use it to say, oh, here's how this guy defines himself. This is his self-image. We all need self-definition, whether it's a 3-year-old saying, I want vanilla ice cream, not chocolate ice cream, whether it's a school kid trying to decide what subjects they want to learn versus what they're not interested in. All of us need to be able to define who we are. This is why in the book you mentioned earlier, Beyond Empathy, I spent a lot of time sharing with psychotherapists the importance of what we call phenomenological inquiry. By phenomenological, I mean the person's subjective experience. And helping a person put their own experience into words. You and I both have experiences we've never really talked about until somebody helps. Come on, what do you feel? What do you think about that? What's going on with inside? And they invite us to define ourselves. And we need self-definition. And when we do that, that brings us right back to number 2. We need the other person to validate that definition of ourselves. And if people don't get a chance to do self-definition in an important relational way, they will do it in destructive ways. I mean, I think of all the graffiti that I see in certain places around town. I think, oh, are these guys really trying to define themselves? They put their tag around, and we've got a program here in Vancouver now that when the police catch some of them, they turn them into artists and they give them a wall and say, okay, this is your wall. Go for this, but you can't damage somebody else's graffiti. So it's one piece of graffiti at a time. It's not one graffiti on top of another. And it's giving them a real chance to express, this is who I am.
Wow.
What's wow mean? What are you thinking?
It's like just the beauty of that, where a society is responsive and reliable, where it sees that and doesn't demonize it and can turn it into something that can help that person in a way that's positive. Like I'm just like I'm wowed at the Vancouver government for that initiative, or that community that feels responsive, and I feel that's like such an important thing, and I see how that relational need can really help give birth to that in some way, whether it's in a family or in a relationship or in a society.
That's right. Yeah. Now, right along with self-definition is the next need to make an impact. All right? To make an impact, to influence the other person in some way. All right? I told you about my daughter being born and they're putting her down on that cold table and she let out a yell. She's trying to make an impact. Don't do this to me. It's cold. All right? When you are trying to influence somebody, you're making a speech or you're working with one of your clients, Nigel, your need there is to make an impact. Or, and even when we're an old person in bed, with pain, saying to the doctor, come on, give me some pain medication. You're trying to make an impact. Right? And the same thing in a partner relationship. We each are trying to impact the other. We're each trying to define ourselves. So when people say, oh, this marriage is not working, this partnership's not working, well, what's missing? Well, I can't make an impact. I say to my husband, I'm going to cook dinner for you. It's going to be ready at 6:00, but he didn't come home sometimes to 7:30 or 8, and the dinner is closed. And I tell him over and over and over again, she can't make an impact with him. And what's a good partner do? It allows himself to be impacted. And I do that as a therapist often, where if I do something that I think might be a little controversial, or I push them too far, or I don't push them enough, I might come back to the next section and say, what was it like for you last time that I pushed you? I want them to make an impact on me so that they can become my teacher. It's not just that I have something to give them, but it's a two-way street.
Yeah, well, I have when there's when it's there's lots of thoughts in my mind as I hear you describe that. On one level, Richard, I'm hearing again that there's something happening in the exchange of impact that really is, again, and you get them to articulate what was it that for there's two people involved here, but it's this something happens when impact happens, and this when we allow impact, when we're responsive to that, or when we can articulate what's just happened, it feels like it's one thing, but it can really help the internal landscape of somebody to understand themselves.
And it's a hard thing for some people to let the other person influence us, to let the other person change us, particularly if we have a much stronger need to define ourselves. But I think both are necessary. Right? To make an impact, we use other words too, like having a sense of agency or a sense of efficacy. Both of those are like being in a car, right? Efficacy means you're in the rider's seat and you've got the map and you tell the driver, turn left, and he does it, right? There you're having an effect. Agency is you're behind the driver's seat, and wherever you turn that wheel, that's where the car is going to go. All right. We need both agency and efficacy. So I use the term impact to describe it.
I remember a time when one of the first times where I allowed myself to borrow my therapist's mind, to allow his sort of wisdom or his presence or his direction to after the session, it percolated like in my being. Wow, like it still lingered. This, and at that time, I was wanting to be. I didn't ever allow anybody to come in to matter in a way. And I just remember when I allowed people to really start to matter, and for me to allow another mind to exist alongside mine, and for it to start to shape mine in that alchemy, it was very profound. And you're bringing me back there as I feel into this some more with you.
Well, you provide a nice bridge to going to the number 7, and that's the need to have the other person initiate. We all need somebody else to put energy into reaching out to us. Now, a lot of the TA people are afraid of that because they think they're going to rescue someone. But people often cannot do something for themselves. They need somebody else to initiate. So that, like the therapist who might, for some reason, be going to a conference or something and not see their patient that week, I often tell them, call up your client. Just say, hello, I've been thinking about you. Or maybe to reach over and give them their hand. Or to somehow to initiate a conversation. We need other people to initiate. That's why people have dogs. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, because what happens when you come home? That
Yeah.
tail is wagging and they are excited. See, I've never known a dog to be sitting in front of the television, having a beer, watching the football game when the mistress comes home. That's why the dogs might get more affection than some of the husbands.
He's there.
That dog is there. That dog knows how to initiate contact.
You helped me remember a moment that was pivotal in my early. I'm still on an early journey of being a therapist, but when I had this client call and said, Nigel, I don't think it's like 5 minutes after. I can't make it today. I says, where are you? He says, I'm in the car park outside your office. He says, I can't get out of the car. I said, just give me a minute. So I went to the car, and that was the change in the therapeutic encounter. I initiated.
You initiated.
And that's was when we started to do the work.
Yeah.
That's something shifted whenever someone had the energy and the want to move towards another being, regardless of his defense.
Yeah. You gave him something of yourself. You moved in his direction.
Yeah. And whether you're listening, here, guys, like just think about the loved ones in your life, your children, friends, like the importance of, initiating, moving towards and getting closer, or at least struggling how that's hard for you. If it's hard for you, then maybe you could reach out and speak to a psychotherapist or, but yeah, it's so important.
And then we thought we were done with our research. And then after looking at it, we realized that there was one more. And that's the need to express love. The need to express gratitude, thankfulness, appreciation, to do loving gestures for others. And we got to this by watching how children can be so loving. Even abused children can be extremely forgiving, to their own detriment sometimes, but they are extremely forgiving. It is the need to express love. And what's required from the rest of us? That's to graciously receive it. Right? So now we're back to our metaphor of the couple. They come in and they can't express their love. They don't express it. Why? Because they don't feel secure in the relationship. They don't feel validated. They don't feel accepted by somebody who's stronger and dependable. They don't get their personal experience confirmed. They can't define themselves. They can't make an impact. Or the opposite. When they say they feel loved, it's because they feel secure. They can make an impact. They can define themselves. They can rely on the other person. So that when those 7 needs are met, then we have a sense of loving abundance to give.
Yeah.
So that's the outcome of that little research project that we did in the late 1980s. But I've been using it and teaching it and working with it ever since. Is simple ideas, but profound in people's lives. Now, if you read the book Beyond Empathy, I spell a lot of these in detail and how to work with them in that book, Beyond Empathy. It's on Amazon if you're interested.
Yeah, and for anybody who wants to know what that looks like, this is it here. And if any of what we've talked about is kind of, impacting you, or there's a wiggle inside, or something's coming alive, or something starts to feel heavy or deadened, then maybe that's a good indication to go further. And maybe the first step could be, get this book on Amazon and check it out.
Let me just say something. How do we know when these needs aren't being met?
Yeah.
It's not obvious to us, right? But what comes up is irritation, restlessness, a sense of emptiness, that loss of vitality, a sense of being either depressed or anxious. Those are the signs that our relational needs are not being met.
So let me ask you a question on this, because that's just you put that in a really lovely frame for me. Let's take a look at, because some of our viewers are maybe in addiction, for example. So let's say, for whether they're doing 12-step recovery, or they're seeing a therapist, or they're in treatment. But what would you imagine would happen if an alcoholic started to develop these 8 relational needs in their life? Because when I started to read these 8 relational needs, I was starting to think, wow, like this to me is a wonderful process, to really develop in everyone's life. And I started to think, because I work with a lot of addicts, and I'm wondering, did you ever do that work with addicts in relation to the impact of that sort of, exploration with them and implementation?
Well, all the guys in my prison program were all addicts, because it was a prison program specifically for addicts in prison.
Okay.
It's sort of paradoxical, because they can't really feel the significance of these relational needs while using. Right? Because the purpose of the using is to numb the awareness of what they need in the relationship. Now, why are they using? I got to have another drink. I have to have another snort, because they're agitated, or because they're empty. Now, we got to also make a distinction between current relational needs in life today, at the age you are, in the situation you are, and the archaic needs of childhood, which, if repeatedly not responded to, the child's got to find some artificial way to compensate for themselves, such as breaking things, stealing things, lying, getting lost in watching television, excessive masturbating, all the kinds of things that somebody will do to distract themselves from the absence of these relational needs. Even telling themselves, something's wrong with me, it's all my fault, which is what a lot of kids coming from troubled homes do. Right. But then they have this deficit, that big emptiness inside, the agitation, the discomfort that is easily anesthetized by alcohol or narcotics or tobacco, overeating, or the opposite, starving themselves. What are you thinking?
This step-by-step description of what you walk through, is really impacting me, because I'm, in this moment, as you rightly picked up, I'm walking through uh, my own childhood. I'm walking through how, yes, I tick that box, I tick that box. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I was breaking things. Yeah, yeah, I was angry. Yeah, I watched TV a lot. I was just feeling, when when that wasn't there, I feel the truth of what you say.
One of my patients who was a heroin user for quite a while, spent a lot of family money on heroin, uh, talked about being an adolescent. He said, there wasn't a car in my neighborhood that wasn't damaged by me. He was so enraged by what was going on in the house. When his parents would be drinking at night and fighting, he would go out and he'd break the mirrors off of every car in the neighborhood. So that's how he tried to deal with not being able to make an impact on the family. He made an impact on everybody's car. He couldn't say to his parents, stop drinking, stop screaming at each other. But he could break off mirrors. Yeah.
So yeah, anybody watching right now, and again, just remembering with your childhood or your child's childhood at this present time, again, there can be signs here that more supports needed, some professional help can be had, or at least a conversation could start to talk about what you might notice within yourself. And as you said, Richard, sometimes what a wonderful gauge. Okay, we may not notice which relational needs are missing, but we can start to notice the agitation, the anxiousness, the sort of depressiveness as indicators to start to be curious about something deeper.
I have one simple little technique that I've used with many parents who've had kids who are stealing or wetting the bed, or they can't get to sleep, or they're having trouble with their mates in school. Uh, and when the parents do it consistently, it really works. The problem is that they don't do it consistently. And that is bedtime. To bring a chair next to your child's bed and sit there with them. And if you haven't done it for a while, the child's going to find it strange and they're not going to talk. But if you do it consistently every day for a month and you engage that child in conversation, and it can begin by reading them a story, you're going to solve a lot of family and social problems by giving that child an opportunity to have a conversation for a half an hour before going to sleep. Unfortunately, so many parents are wrapped up with other kids, doing the laundry, getting ready the next day, uh, cooking something, cleaning up, and they're exhausted. They want to sit down and watch television, and the kid is laying there alone. But you can deal with a lot of school age and adolescent problems just a half an hour a day. But in the beginning, if you haven't done it, the kid's going to find it strange and they're not going to know how to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So the parent has to really be willing to sit in the silence, but also to keep inquiring.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine what your life would be like if your parents had sat and talked to you honestly in the evening?
would have been a different world, totally different world. And as you're sitting there, I remember last night when my daughter at 3.5 years of age said, "Daddy, can we read that story again? I really like the dentist one." And I spent 40 minutes, 30 minutes, and I notice how powerful that is for the rest of the day, with how she is, how she can deal with life at that young age. And it's fun, it's play, it's stories, it's lots of things. But I think in the story, I think you take a lot of those emotional or those relational needs, right? In that presence, agency, something to rub up against that sort of impact,
Yeah. And even many times I'd stop the story early and say, okay, now what do you think about this story? And what does you think this means? And what did you feel when this happened? And what you're doing with those kinds of questions is you're asking the child to define herself, to put into words her own mind.
All I feel is like I'm able to do today with you, Richard, to say, wow.
Well, we said we're going to talk for 30 minutes. We've been at it for 45 minutes.
So
Did you have something else in mind?
No, this feels to be, it feels I'm full. This feels really, really above and beyond what I was expecting today. And again, for anybody out there listening that got something from this, please know that you can access any of our Richard's book on Amazon. And definitely the one that speaks to me the most at this moment in time is Beyond Empathy. It's a powerful book, and I really if you're a parent, if you're somebody who wants to look deeper at who you are and to understand yourself in a way, I strongly recommend it. And in the link, you can if you want to explore more of what Richard does, check and follow him up in the links that's provided in the paragraph below this video. And if you are impacted in any way, please hit a little like or a share or put a wee comment in and let us know what moved you, what brought you alive. But Richard, thank you. Thank you for your heart. Thank you for your wonderful mind and your dedication to this world of therapy and the contributions you've made and continually will be making in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Feels like I've got the most wonderful job in the world. Nigel, thank you for the wonderful community service that you do with this program.
Thank you,
Wish
Richard.
you well.
Thank you. And see you all, folks. I'll see you next week at the same time. Take care of yourself. Reach out, and remember, underneath everything we were saying today, we can't do this thing called life by ourselves, and we need people. We need people.
Relationship is the healing process.
Amen. What a way to segue. Thank you, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guests.